is called Making Metal Move, and it's being presented by Mr. Michael Glisson. Mr. Glisson has been part of the college team for about 18 months as the Director of Purchasing and Auxiliary Services. And when I say 18 months, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but it seems like you've been part of our team a lot longer than that. It's not like, oh my God, he's only been here 18 months. It's like he's been here all the time. He does such good work for us. So he's a veteran of the United States Army with more than 30 years of service. So Mike, thank you for your service. We have lots of veterans in the room, so thank all of you for your service. Mike has been pursuing metalwork and blacksmithing for more than 45 years and received a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree in jewelry and metalsmithing from Southern Illinois University at Carbondale. His wife Laura, who's with us here today, she's a retired kindergarten teacher from the Fox District, and both of their children graduated from Jefferson College degree programs. So got some alumni in the family too. We like that. Today's presentation, again called Making Metal Move, will cover blacksmithing, past, present, and future. So please help me in welcoming Mr. Mike Glisson.
So this is the agenda today that kind of outlines what I'm going to talk to you all about. As Dina outlined, when we started the process of doing this, I got asked to give the talk, and then they said, well, we need a title, and we need to know what you're going to talk about, so I kind of had to make some things up. And I came up with the Making Metal Move, and I wanted to hit on the past, present, and future. And as I put this together, I thought about the questions that people that do metal work typically get. So hopefully I'll hit some of those as we go through. And I know there's at least one blacksmith in the room who will try to keep me honest. And I'll ask about some other trades as we go. But these are the things that I hope to cover with you here today. So some housekeeping. I am going to walk around and I do talk with my hands. If I get too far downrange, then I'll start getting feedback and I'll know I need to come up front. If you have questions, feel free to ask. It may be something that I'm going to address in the future slide, I'll tell you, and we'll have time for questions at the end. Today's is important. This is November. There's a lot of important things that happen in November. First of all, any Marines in the room? Former Marines? Cool. Happy birthday. All right. Veterans Day on the 11th. I understand there's more than just me in the room. Well, thank you for your service. Welcome home. Another important day, at least for some of us in the room, the 250th birthday of the United States Army Field Artillery was the 17th of November. Any artillerymen in the room? I probably couldn't hear you anyway, so. Other than Kurt, are there any blacksmiths in the room? Oh, got one in the back. Cool. We'll talk later. Of course, we've got Thanksgiving coming up, and I'm sure everybody in the room's got a ton to be thankful for. I'll touch on some of that as I go. Are there any machinists in the room? Any metallurgists in the room? All right, guys, be nice, okay? I'm a blacksmith. I'm a self-taught metallurgy guy, and I'm definitely not a precision machinist. Are there any alumni of SIU Carbondale in the room? Any Salukis? I know there's one. Okay, cool. Good to see. So now I know a little bit about you. Let me tell you a little bit about me, how I got to be a blacksmith. This is primarily because I had a very supportive family. These two books were the first books that my mom and dad bought me when I got interested in doing metalwork. I grew up in a family of makers. They were very supportive. I know not everybody has that, so it was a very big blessing for me. As far as education, a majority of my education as a metal worker has come from spending time with other blacksmiths, and I'll talk about some of the forums that we get to do that in. We're very fortunate here in the state of Missouri to have an organization that does a lot of education and outreach. And as Dina mentioned, I went through a Bachelor of Fine Arts program with a specialization in metalsmithing, specifically blacksmithing at SIU in Carbondale. At the time, there were some real rock stars in the profession teaching there. As a young college kid, I really didn't appreciate the people that I had the opportunity to work with, but I was blessed with that. The shop that I operate, the thing that I work behind is called Black Rabbit Forge. I've used that title for about 20 years now. I do have a page on Facebook. It's just called Black Rabbit Forge. It's got a lot of photographs and things of my work, and I hope to do some educational stuff with it. I do have a logo or touch mark that I use on my metal that's very similar to the logo you see on the screen. And I'll let you all ponder on where that term Black Rabbit Forge might have come from, and if somebody asks at the end, I'll tell you. So, first of all, I went to art school, so I didn't have to do math and geometry, but it just kind of keeps following me around. I'm going to talk a little bit about volume and geometry, and then we're going to get into some audience participation. So one of the things that people always ask about is how much does metal weigh? Generally speaking, a cubic inch of standard steel weighs about 0.28 pounds, a little over 4 ounces. So if you think about it being 1 by 1 by 1, and you start stretching it out, these numbers just kind of add up. So all the forging process is really moving volume around and changing cross-section. So I'll show you a picture here in a minute, but I've got some 1 cubic inch blocks of steel that I started with, and what I wanted to do was make something, see how long I can make it, see how flat I can make it, and then with 1 cubic inch do something interesting with it. So I'm going to add, these are approximately, maybe a little more, but approximately 1 cubic inch. So, yeah, a little Play-Doh. So, y'all see how long you can make those? Y'all see how flat you can make those? Anybody here want to play? Sure. All right, let's make something interesting. Doesn't matter what, something interesting, your call. How about 2 more? Anybody else want to play? There you go. There you go. Your call. Long, flat, or interesting. And then we'll do some show and tell at the end. So these are the 3 pieces that I started with, sitting on my anvil, and again, not precision. Okay, I did it on bandsaw. I didn't weigh them. I don't know that they're exactly 1 cubic inch. What is the blacksmith? Well, in addition to the 17th of November being the 250th birthday of the United States Army Field Artillery, it was my 60th birthday. So now I know what I want to do when I grow up. I want to be a blacksmith. All right, a blacksmith is a person that works with or forges iron and steel. Now, a lot of blacksmiths may work with other metals, but if you look in the etymology of the way things were named, goldsmiths work with gold, silversmiths work with silver, tinsmiths work with tin, blacksmiths work with black metal, generally iron and steel. And typically it's also the opposite of the machinist. Okay, we don't work at the same level of precision. I'm comfortable I can forge something to a 32nd, but I don't get into thousands. I can't even think that small. So in the past, these are the types of things that a blacksmith would have been or would have done. Again, they're either generalists or specialists working with a specific material. A person who shoes horses is called a farrier. That's a trade and a science in and of itself. People go to school to learn to do that so they don't hurt the animals that they're working on. There are blacksmiths that do farrier work and farriers that do blacksmith work. Wheelwrights traditionally were the people that built wagons and put ironclad wheels together. Again, it's a specialty in and of itself. There may be some crossover. Same with gunsmiths and bladesmiths. Armorers. And in a small-town blacksmith shop in the past, say in the early 1900s, that person also probably would have done mechanic work, or when welding technology became available, be it electric or oxyacetylene, that's where it probably would have taken place. Blacksmiths are almost always tool makers, so you could be one or all of these types of things. Industries that typically had blacksmiths on staff included railroads, coal mines, oil fields, things like that. The railroad shop in DeSoto, I don't think they still employ any blacksmiths, but until about 20 years ago, they had blacksmiths on the staff. They had a forge set up in the shop. So, important people in the blacksmithing world. Now, if I could go back to one of the previous slides, I had a disclaimer on there. Everything I'm going to say today is me. It's not Jeffco policy, and the other blacksmiths in the community may not view things quite the way I do. So again, from my point of view and my educational background and upbringing, these are 2 very important people. Mr. Samuel Yellen was a Ukrainian immigrant came over in the very early 1900s, and he became a metal worker. He may have been a metal worker when he got here, but he set up a large architectural metalworking facility in Philadelphia. And he produced some absolutely amazing work. I was telling the library crew there was just a 2-volume set published of a collection of photographs of his architectural work. There's still a number of really big buildings in Philadelphia that have facades and door frames and doorways and gates and light fixtures that his shop produced. Now, an individual that was an apprentice in his shop was Mr. Francis Whitaker. Francis went on to be a very prominent blacksmith in the United States. He had a shop out in Golden, Colorado, and he passed away relatively recently in the grand scheme of things. I had the opportunity to be around Francis a handful of times when I was at conferences and educational events. He was an incredible teacher. So it brings us to the present, and if the present can start in the 70s, the resurgence in the interest for arts and crafts, at least a lot of the hands-on stuff, blacksmithing, weaving, basket making, a lot of pottery work, you can really kind of pull a line backwards in time to the mid-70s. With the bicentennial and the interest in Colonial Williamsburg. The publication of the Foxfire books is pretty interesting because those books, I believe, were published by University Press, I think in Georgia maybe. Anyway, they're still available. I don't know that they're still in print. But they had a lot of interesting stories and articles and information about handcrafts and making whiskey and building guns and ghost stories and all this Appalachian Ozark type story mythology, fantastic history reference books. And when the movie The Life and Times of Grizzly Adams came out in 1974, that kind of piqued a lot of people's interest in black powder firearms, which aren't that far from blacksmithing, because blacksmiths make gun parts, and people that do black powder shooting like knives, and they want tomahawks. Those are things that blacksmiths make. So all of that's kind of all balled up together in the same knot of twine. But you can really pull, and even with the development of the educational programs in the universities, like the one at SAU, the people that, there were people that were interested in all this that then brought that back up into popular culture. And when we talk about the educational or the professional organizations, a lot of those started in the same time frame. So in my view of history, these three things kind of led to get us to where we are. I can't talk about blacksmithing, unfortunately, in popular culture now without touching on forging and fire. That has brought a lot of interest to the craft, and I'll talk more about it. But it's definitely part of the present culture. Now, there are currently a lot of people that do metalwork, and I'll talk about our state association more in a little while, but there are around 550 members of the Blacksmith Association of Missouri, and those range from retirees that do it as a hobby, young people that are just getting into the craft, and then in the middle there are full-time people that do art, sculpture, tool making, blacksmithing, general blacksmithing, knife making, a variety of things for a living every day. So that kind of ties us into the present. A conflict that a lot of people discuss is the balance between traditional techniques and tools and modern techniques and tools. I remember sitting in a lecture with Francis Whitaker one time talking about Yellen's shop, and this came up, you know, did they only use traditional techniques? And Francis basically said, if it's a new thing and it works and we can use it, we're going to use it. And we would have then. We used oxyacetylene torches. When welders came out, we incorporated welders. So there's a kind of a tension between traditional versus modern, both in aesthetic and technique. And then you've got the art versus craft. You know, maybe it's art the first time you make one and then the rest of them are craft. I don't know. But it's a tension. So what do blacksmiths make? I started out with metal that's like clay, and you all got some Play-Doh to play with, okay? In my opinion, a blacksmith can make damn near anything, okay? Two pictures here. There's some handmade nails. I did not make these. I can't remember the name of the shop, Seven Pines Forge. I think they're in Canada that made those. So how many of you have been to the St. Louis Zoo? All right. Albert Paley, a jeweler turned blacksmith turned sculptural forger, made the gates or the display that's out front. It's Albert Paley's St. Louis Zoo installation. So it runs from something that small to something that's the size of, well, I think that sculpture is close to 250 feet wide. So it's quite elaborate. But what blacksmiths do runs the gamut from industrial forgings. If you fish around on the internet, there's a lot of wonderful videos of shops that are mostly in either China, Pakistan, or India doing industrial forgings, and it's just mesmerizing to watch these guys take huge multi-cubic feet blocks of steel and turn them into industrial forgings that then they turn over to machinists that become parts of the things that we use here in the United States. Architectural forgings, that's still a thing. The type of work that Mr. Yellen did in Philadelphia for those buildings there, those still take place. There's some very successful blacksmiths out in California working primarily in naval bronze that do interior gates and railings and stairwells and things like that. So this still gets done every day. There's a lot of people doing historical reproductions. Oftentimes, I just saw a post somewhere. There was a group who has an old steam tractor that was looking for, this might have been a BAM thing, looking for a blacksmith to make a bracket for one of the mirrors on their tractor. They had one, but the other one was missing. And the only way they can get the one they need is to have a blacksmith make it. Blades, we'll talk about, functional items, and you can even get down into hardware and jewelry, and a lot of this overlaps. I do living history stuff as a reenactor, mostly French and Indian War types of things. I will make hardware for boxes that we use for stuff. So I'm making handles and hinges as part of that. So it runs the gamut. The types of forging operations. Again, metal is like clay. So you can take a piece of metal or a piece of clay, you can punch a hole in it, you can bend it, you can draw it out to make it longer, you can upset it to make it shorter. Now with metal, I'm doing this hot. With steel, I'm doing this hot, and I'm doing it with tools I can't use for very long, my hands, to move it like the clay. There's processes called fullering and swaging, obviously cutting, flattening things out. The term welding really means to join two like materials. We'll talk a little bit, I don't think I have a slide on forge welding, but we can't weld metal together in a coal forge or a propane forge. Metal itself, if it's clean and it's flat and it's put together, it will weld itself together over time. NASA has to contend with that in space. You can't put perfectly smooth metal next to perfectly smooth metal in a vacuum. It will bond. And we try to replicate that here in this atmosphere, but oxygen is a bit of a problem. And a very specific process, and this goes to knife making or tool making, is heat treating. On Forged in Fire, I'm not a fan of reality TV, but this is a great example. A lot of times you'll see them quenching a blade in oil and you get all the flames. First of all, they're doing most of it way too hot. But the processes involved in heat treating are these. At first, you're going to take this piece of steel that you've been working on, and you've been working on it for a while, so it's all tensed up, right? So you want to get it to relax, and you want that structure, that crystalline structure inside, to get back in a bit of an orderly fashion. So that process is annealing or normalizing. The difference between those two is how slow it gets cooled. Then you're going to take that piece of metal and you're going to get it up above critical temp. I'll talk about that in a minute. But basically you're going to get it hot enough, and then you're going to quench it to freeze that crystalline structure in the right place where you want it, or close to where you want it. And that makes that metal very tense and very hard. And then you have to get it back in the process to temper it. And that's to get it to relax just a little bit so that it's as hard as you want, but not too hard to break. So that's heat treating in a nutshell. But people that do commercial heat treating, this is a science in and of itself, an art in and of itself, and they go to school for a long time to figure this out, what I just explained in a little bit. The ways to get at forging operations, obviously there's hand forging with a hammer and tongs. Most of us use power hammers that are driven either by air or steam or they're mechanical power hammers. There's drop forging operations that are used in industry now to make tools, to shape metal. as well as presses, both hydraulic presses, and there's a fantastic tool that's been around for a very long time called a fly press. It has a huge counterweight wheel on top. They're a lot of fun to use because they're almost silent. And then there's a really cool thing called a roll forging process where, again, you can find a video of this online where you're basically taking a piece of metal, punching a hole in it, putting it on a pivot point, and then smashing things around that pivot point while it rotates. So this piece of metal magically before your eyes becomes this huge, huge circle. Again, that's an industrial process. And I will say that, you know, forging is complementary to machining and welding and fabrication. I work with machinists, I work with fabricators, I work with welders. I do a little bit of all, well, I don't do hardly any machining, but everything that each of those crafts, skills does can be complementary to each other because there's some things each one of those can do that the other can't. So, tools. You can't work without tools unless you're working with Play-Doh. And then you can use tools. So the forge, everybody sees pictures of forges. That's the big fire thing in the middle of the shop usually. Most often they're either burning coal or solid fuel. Pretty much anything you can burn that's got BTUs in it, you can crank enough oxygen into to get metal hot. I've seen guys use seed corn, I've seen guys use mesquite charcoal, you know, pretty much anything you can burn. A lot of people now use propane forges. A propane forge is a lot like a propane, you know, a gas grill. If I want to cook 2 chicken breasts, I can just turn the grill on and do it. I don't have to spend 30 minutes building a fire. Propane is a very, very convenient fuel for blacksmiths to use, particularly if they've got confined space. It is a magical, magical fuel, but it will never miss an opportunity to blow you up or kill you because of carbon monoxide. So there's a safety problem with that as a fuel. There is a forge or a heating process called induction forging, which uses an electric current, create a magnetic field, and you pass the metal through that, and it gets hot, and it is magic. It's been around since the early 1900s in industry, but it's finally become tabletop size, and you can buy one off eBay or off Amazon for a few $100s, and it'll work for a little while. But it's really cool while it works. Yeah. So you're going to get something hot, you have to have a surface to work on. We could, well, maybe not we, but I could talk for hours about anvils. Okay, the anvil is the work surface that you've got. There are, in the world, there are anvils and there are anvil-shaped objects. Not everything that looks like an anvil will actually function as one. The hammer, it's an extension of your hand. That's the impact tool. The tongs are how you hold things. In any project that gets done, there's probably a tool that gets made that's specific to that project to make or mark or hold a thing. So there's lots of specialty jigs and lots of specialty tools. Important tools in the shop, no matter what skill level you have or what you're going to do, is your personal protective equipment. Safety glasses are non-negotiable. Ear protection should be, but I'm standing before you with big hearing aids because I didn't listen so well, no pun intended. And you can kind of go from there. Depending on how far down the OSHA rabbit hole you want to go, steel-toed shoes and safety, gloves and all of that. But every blacksmith I know has probably been caught working in Crocs and shorts, and I will say don't weld in Crocs. That's my safety tip for everybody. A couple other things that I think are very important in my shop: a whiteboard or a chalkboard. I'm constantly sketching as I'm working if it's a new idea because I got to work it out a little bit on a line before I start trying to do it in metal. You can use a piece of wire to do the same thing to get a good measurement, but I've actually, one of the power hammers in my shop, I've got a metal bracket that I can hang on the front of it that I can set a whiteboard in, and I can sketch stuff out and then I can take it away. Our smartphones are very powerful tools for arts and crafts people. You've got an incredibly cool, very powerful camera in that phone. I use my phone to take pictures and to use in Google Notes as I'm going along. I'm writing stuff on the whiteboard and I'm taking a picture of it before I erase the whiteboard. But it also has Spotify and it plays my music. I don't work in my shop unless I'm listening to music. What kind of music do blacksmiths listen to? This is a dad joke. So. Heavy metal. I've waited all day to do that. in my case, it's a little bit of everything. When I used to do a lot of small sterling silver jewelry work in college, I listened to a lot of jazz because that helped me understand the curves I was working with. A lot of times in the shop, I've got music playing very loud, I'm wearing hearing protection, and I'm running the power hammer, so it probably doesn't matter what I'm listening to because I'm really not hearing it. So the materials that blacksmiths work with, okay, iron is basically dirt. It's a little more refined. A lot of the materials we use in industry are basically dirt, some level of refinement behind it. But iron is ferrous, it means it's magnetic. And when you add carbon to it, then it becomes this magic thing called steel, which means we can harden it and we can do other things to it, like make tools and knives. Some things that people ask a lot when, or have asked me in the past at least, is, you know, oh, it's red hot. How hot is that? Well, it kind of depends on the light that we're in. Red hot in my shop, if the lights are off, is different than red hot in here right now. Typically speaking, it's around 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That's where it'll start to show color. And then when you get up to, you know, on the other end of that, around 25, it's going liquid and there's all kinds of sparks coming off on it. If you see them sparking metal on forged in their fire, it's way too hot. Anyway, so I mentioned critical temp earlier, and this is really important for people that do heat treating work, and to understand what happens when you're doing that. The critical temp or the Curie temp, I had to look that term up. I knew there had to be a scientific term for it other than critical. And it's the temp at which that iron, that steel, becomes non-magnetic. And it has to do with the motion of the molecules in the metal. But at a certain point, a magnet will no longer stick to it. So if we're doing something in the shop, using a magnet is a very low-tech way to determine how hot that piece of metal is. So if it's not sticking, I know it's getting close to 1,400 degrees. Similarly, when I heat treat, I know because a rocket scientist who was a master bladesmith told me that used motor oil flashes at 400 degrees Fahrenheit. So if I got motor oil to flash, I know I'm at 400 degrees. He might have been wrong, but that was 30 years ago and I'm still doing it. He was a rocket scientist. So, but typically the temperatures that I'm moving metal around, changing cross sections, trying to make things longer, flatter, and interesting shape. I'm working that metal somewhere between 2,000 and 2,400 degrees. Again, it kind of depends on the metal and it depends on the alloy. When we start adding other things to steel, to iron, to that carbon mix, phosphorus, magnesium, chromium, any number of things, that changes the properties of the metal, it changes the forgeability of the metal, it changes the temperature range, changes the heat treating properties. So alloys, when you buy new steel, you can get a data sheet with that new steel that will tell you all of that stuff. If you're using recycled steel, it's a little bit more trial and error. There's some shortcuts, but so a lot of people will use the term wrought iron. Wrought iron is actually a type of iron. It is a type of material. It is not a style. It is not the fence material that you buy at Lowe's or Home Depot. It is a material that's made by refining iron ore. Okay, like I said, it's almost all dirt. It just depends on how much we refine it and which direction that we take that refining in. Now, non-ferrous metals that a lot of blacksmiths will work with from time to time include copper, bronze, silver. Bronze is it forges in a very similar fashion to iron as does copper, except you don't have to. I've done a lot of copper and silver forging, not so much bronze. And with copper and silver, I forge it cold and it work hardens. And then I have to heat it up, let it cool down, then I can forge it cold until it stops moving. And I can heat it up, let it cool down. So it works kind of the opposite of the ferrous metal. It's kind of fascinating. Now, junkyard steel and recycling. Blacksmiths suffer from a lot of weird medical conditions, one of which is the desire to like jump out of a moving car and grab a piece of scrap metal they see on the side of the road. I've done it, you've done it. So we do like to recycle. The challenge with it's both a challenge and an opportunity. With the manufacturing processes in the steel industry that we have right now, we are surrounded by high quality steel. The coat hangers in the back of the room probably have a higher tensile strength steel in them that was available in 1800, and that's making coat hangers. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But we have access to so much good steel now that did not exist or was not available widely at all 100 years ago. The challenge is we get it and we got to figure out what it'll do. There's some things that we can do. All steels will spark slightly different. So if I know the piece that I have that I bought from the mill is 5160 tool steel, and I can find a piece and make sure they spark close to the same, they're probably going to behave in a similar fashion. But there's entire books written on junkyard steel and how to identify things and figuring out what was that piece of metal used for the first time. That was an axle. All right, so what properties does an axle have? It's going to have some high torsion capability. So you can look at what it was used for, and that'll kind of help you decide what you can get away with using it for now. So materials are, we spend a lot of time messing with materials. So blacksmiths and bladesmiths. If you saw the pictures, there's a lot of knobs in there. I am not a master bladesmith. I'm not even a member of the ABS. But I'm a blacksmith who makes a knife from time to time. There are blacksmiths that make blades, and there are bladesmiths that do some general blacksmithing, and there are people that don't cross those lines. I have a great deal of respect to anybody that's got their master stamp from the ABS. The American Bladesmithing Society was founded in '76, back to that mid-'70s thing. If you go to their website, it's a pretty interesting history about how they all came together and what they did. They are, in the blade world, that's the accrediting body. If you want to be a famous knife maker, that's a way to do it. In the Blacksmith Association of Missouri, there are a handful of master ABS stamp owning smiths. They're great to work with. They know a lot about what they do. And we touched on Forged in Fire. I don't like reality TV of any type. The challenge that I have with Forged in Fire is everything's very compressed in time, and it's misleading. What really takes 10 hours to do, you're seeing in a 30-minute clip. And sometimes there's some technical errors that are being fixed behind the scenes that nobody knows about, so we think, everybody gets the impression we can get it crazy orange hot and throw it in oil and set it on fire, and it's going to come out in a magic way, and it's not going to happen. But that show has increased interest in interest in the craft a great deal, and there are a lot of people out there that are doing work now that probably wouldn't have been, particularly young people. And it has forced some changes, I think, in the industry to produce some equipment that more people can use in an easier, smaller shop fashion. So it's not all bad. But to talk about knife making, there are basically 3 ways to make a knife. You can either shape it through a forging process, or you can do stock removal, where you're starting with a block or a bar and you're grinding material away. I never learned to do stock removal work. It seemed wrong to me to take a very expensive piece of steel and grind 3/4 of it away into dust. So I learned to do blades through forging. Now you can't do a combination of that process, and 90% of us that do knife work probably do a legitimate combination of both. A lot of what you'll see in the knife making world is an emphasis on pattern development and pattern welded steel. I prefer the term pattern welded steel. You will hear it called Damascus steel. In my view of history, Damascus is a place in Syria that they used to do this a long, long time ago. The process, method, and recipe was lost to history. There are a few people who have been able to recreate it, but generally what is called Damascus in the industry right now is pattern welded steel. It's layers of steel, different types of steel, that are welded together and manipulated, and whether etched in acid or surface treated some other way, they produce really, really cool colors and patterns. It's a fascinating process. There's also a process called canister Damascus, and not to put you on the spot, but Kurt's father had a great deal to do with teaching a lot of us about how to do good canister Damascus using powdered steels. But if you're making blades, the blade is just the beginning. It is not at all out of the realm of possibility to have more time, if as much or more time, in the fittings that go on the blade, the handle that goes on the blade, the leather or the kydex that the blade goes in. If in the sword making world, a katana, a Japanese blade, goes from the person who makes the blade to the person who polishes the blade before it goes to the person who actually sharpens it or does the fittings for it, or then goes to the person that does the handles. So there are many, 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 many steps. So a weekend class to make a knife is probably not going to get you all the way to there. I've asked a couple of ABS master smiths, how long does it take you to make a knife? Because I was curious, because I know how long it takes me. And they're like, typically I've got about 10 hours in a blade. So if you get 10 hours in a blade and there's going to be another 10 in the handle and maybe another 10, then you're into 30 hours. It's almost a full 40-hour week. And when you start trying to do math around that, that's why they cost so much. But yeah, the blade is just the beginning. So let's talk a little bit about education and organizations, because this is a lot of what got me where I am. There are national level blacksmithing associations in the United States. We've got the Artist Blacksmiths Association in North America. They do conferences every couple of years. They publish a really nice professional journal. They've been around since 1973. There are also organizations in other countries. I'm familiar with the Canadian Association, the Australian Association, the British Association. There's a variety. And they do conferences as well, and they often send people to our conferences and things like that. At the state level, I'm not aware of a state that doesn't have an organization of some type. Some are far more active than others. In Missouri, we are blessed to have the Blacksmiths Association in Missouri. Like I said, there's about 550 members at this point in time, and they range in capability and product. I mentioned that I went through the program at Carbondale in the art department, and there are a lot of college art departments throughout the country, art and design departments that may have a blacksmithing component. There are a handful that, like SIU and Carbondale, that will have a functioning shop. I can't give you a list because it kind of changed over time. There are also a number of high school shop classes that have some element of blacksmithing. And a lot of the work that goes into making that happen in a high school is, first of all, having an instructor who's interested, and then trying to figure out what the shop space will support, because you're maybe lighting a propane forge in a room full of wood dust. And then there's some insurance people that'll weigh in on whether it's a good idea or not. But there are more and more high school shop classes. I know I do programs during the summer with scouts down at Esbarra Scout Ranch, and every now and then, probably about every second or third group, I'll get a kid in who's done some sort of blacksmithing in some sort of forge work in a shop class. So it's really cool to see. Some places with formal programs, whether they're 3 days or 2 weeks or a month, John C. Campbell, Penland, and the Center for Metal Arts in Johnstown's a really cool place. These people all have great instructors that are either there all the time or cycle through, and they're typically very well equipped. And then at the more local level, if you want to go take a blacksmithing class next weekend, one of these people can hook you up. The Craft Alliance, the Craft Central through Mueller Industries over in Fenton, Matthias out in Ava, there's a place in Mount Vernon, the Farrier's Wife down in St. John, Kohler Forge, plug for him, that's my nephew. I got him into this, so I got to give him a plug. Charlie Carpenter, I don't know where Big River Forge is. It's here in Missouri. Charlie is an ABS master smith that does knife making classes, and then there are opportunities for young people through scouting. To go back to the Forged and Fire thing for a minute, the youngest person to ever win Forged and Fire is a kid named Colton Kisso, and he runs a shop called Heath Creek Forge here in Missouri. He's a member of the Blacksmiths Association of Missouri. He does beautiful work. He's a great guy. So, what's the future look like for blacksmithing? It is a post-apocalyptic life skill. Power goes out, I can still make stuff. So, it's kind of a cool thing. Now, there are new materials. I touched on alloy steels. There are new materials that come out every day. And they're not necessarily designed for blacksmiths. We just find them and then figure out what we can do with them. So that's a lot of fun to mess with. alloys, yeah, chemistry and metallurgy, mind-blowing stuff. New finishes. A lot of us will typically, when you first start doing blacksmithing, everybody wants to spray paint everything flat black with cheap spray paint from Walmart. It's a horrible finish, horrible finish. But the longer you do it, the more you learn about oil finishes and beeswax finishes and Renaissance wax finishes. And I just finished reading a book about forging tubing and doing organic forms, and the guy was getting these beautiful colors, and I couldn't figure out. I finally got to the page on finishes, and he's using Crayola crayons while the metal's hot. He's getting these beautiful colors, and then he's sealing it, and yeah, so you gotta figure it out. A lot of blacksmiths might have something, a recipe that got passed down to them. So there's a lot of new finishes, new technology. Technology improves all the time. We can cut things out of big metal now that we couldn't have imagined doing 50 years ago or even 10 years ago. Using the EDM wire system, lasers or water jet. Water jet anymore is almost not precision when we compare it to EDM. It's amazing, amazing technology. There's always new things coming out in abrasives. So when you talk about that stock removal, it doesn't change the process, but the belts last longer, or the belts don't shed material that will fry your lungs as quickly. So there's always changes in that. Refractory material, you know, if we're building a fire in something, we like to contain as much heat as we can so we can use it. So refractory material gets lighter, it gets more efficient, it gets castable, or it's spun into blankets that we can roll around. So that technology changes all the time. And then with tools, and like I said, I talked about forged in fire and how things have gotten smaller. A company that used to maybe make only a 30-ton hydraulic press or a 50-ton hydraulic press will now make a 12-ton that sits on a tabletop, so some kid in a garage can use it to make pattern welded, not Damascus, billets. The same with power hammers. Power hammers have been around for a very, very, very long time. The earliest ones were driven by, you know, water wheels, big, huge trip hammers. Now I can buy a small one that will sit on the tabletop that I can hook up to an air compressor. So it doesn't change the process, but it makes it available to a lot more people. I know of a guy, I can't remember his name, but he lives up in a nice neighborhood in Kirkwood, and he makes some really impressive sword blades, and he's doing it in his garage in a neighborhood, and he's doing it with an induction forge and a hydraulic press because it doesn't make any noise. So he's not belching smoke, and he doesn't have a power hammer shaking things off the shelves in his neighbor's house. I've heard that complaint. And the other big thing about the future is there are interested youth now. When I started hanging out with people like Francis Whitaker back when I was 14 years old, there was easily 30 years between me and the next oldest or the next youngest person in the room. Now when we have a band meeting, there's kids that are too young for us to legally allow to participate in a demonstration because their insurance says they've got to be 12 or 14. And there's more than one of them. You know, when we do events, there are people there. There are young people there. There are young people like Colton that I mentioned that are making a run at doing this for a living. And that's great to see. And then, you know, one of the reasons that I do what I do with the Scouts down at SBRF every summer for as many weeks as I can do it is because of that. Is to take that kid who may have never done anything with his hands and show him that this is possible. If you remember in the pictures, there was a project board showing how to make a flint striker. That's a project that we do with the Scouts at SBRF. So some miscellaneous things, because everybody's got crazy stuff in the background, right? So blacksmiths need so much help. We have at least 2 patron saints. Okay? Dunstan's the guy on the left. Clement is the one on the right. He's grouchy because he got tied to an anchor and thrown over a boat. But St. Dunstan, if you look it up, it's a really cool story about how the devil came to visit him in his forge. And depending on the version that you read, he either like tied him up and shoot his cloven hooves, or grabbed him by the nose and threw him out with his tongs. But yeah, we've got at least two patron saints. The first mention of blacksmiths in the Bible is in Genesis 4:22. A gentleman named Tubal-Cain, who is in the Bible's lineage, the first blacksmith and bronze worker. You may have heard of Hephaestus. He's the Greek god of blacksmithing. I'm sure you've heard of Thor and Vulcan. So let's see, in order, the top one is Hephaestus, Thor, Vulcan, and this cat here, Wayland, no, that is a carving of Tubal-Cain. So from a literary standpoint, it's Norse, German, that kind of European descent story about a guy named Wayland the Smith. And it's a great read, but it is definitely not a bedtime story for kids. It's like everything from, you know, Icarus and the sun to the enemy, the skulls of your enemies, and it's an interesting read. But blacksmiths are mentioned throughout literature and all the way back to the beginning of time. Environmental issues that we work with, blacksmiths will get criticized for burning solid fuels. Typically we use coal, not the most popular thing to be dragging across the country, but I will tell you that blacksmiths don't like bad coal. We want the cleanest burning coal we can get. So if you see blacksmiths burning coal, it's the lowest sulfur coal available. And noise. Noise is an issue. A lot of things we do makes a lot of noise. So that's an environmental consideration. And what we do is not without politics. I've touched on steel a lot, and I'll go back to my disclaimer. This is my understanding or my interpretation of history and industry. The German steel industry and the Japanese steel industry were bombed out of existence in the 40s. Okay? The United States steel industry was in full bore in the 40s, and we kept going. But we didn't improve our technology. And Japan's steel industry and Germany's steel industry, some of which was on our taxpayers' dollars, got rebuilt with new stuff. So coming out of World War II, by the 60s, they were almost 100 years ahead of us in technology. So that kind of tilted the balance on how steel production was run at a at a global level. And that trickled down to steel quality and steel prices even today in the United States. So there's always something. At one point, about 10 years ago, maybe not that long, maybe only 7, the United States blacklisted some industries, some specific manufacturers for selling dual-use technology, stuff that could be used for military purposes as well as civilian. And I think it was aimed primarily at Iran and somewhat at Russia. But one of the companies that wound up on that list is a company called Anyang, who at the time was manufacturing, among other things, power hammers and some pretty nice ones. And they had started to make small ones that were, on the base, they were about that tall. And for a period of time, we could no longer import them because of this. It had absolutely nothing to do with the embargo that had been placed on them, but it was a side effect of that. And we deal with economics, tariffs, and exchange rates all the time. The British government recently, like in the last 18 months, imposed some restrictions on the British Postal Service and prohibited the shipment of knives, of things with sharp edges. And that almost overnight crippled the knife makers in Great Britain. This is still being sorted out in court, but there were people that were doing incredible work that could no longer ship their product out of the country, let alone within. So there's always things that get spun up like that, and economics are a big part of it. There's an anvil manufacturer. Again, I could talk about anvils for a long time, but there's an anvil manufacturer in Holland, Michigan. Got into making anvils about 8 years ago. They were already in the steel casting business, doing some pretty interesting work. They'd figured out how to cast a steel called H13 fairly easily, and they got into making anvils and blacksmithing tools. I found out about 3 or 4 or 5 days ago they're going out of business. They poured their last because they can't make it economically anymore. And their stuff was not cheap. And I don't know all the details, but you know, the industry comes and goes and ebbs and flows. And people that are selling things or people who make things and rely on tools from other industries, we're kind of at those economic whims like everybody else. I think I was on a military trip one time in Poland, and one of the officers that I worked with was from Finland, and we agreed that we were going to exchange some things, and I made him a knife, and I shipped it to him and in Finland, and I filled out the customs paperwork as I thought I was supposed to, and not understanding the value-added tax system in Finland, he had to pay substantially more to get that knife out of customs than I intended, so there's always something. So 4 things in closing, and then we're going to go to show and tell. Blacksmithing is alive and well, but it is challenged, okay, like all arts and crafts are. Challenged for a lot of reasons. I encourage you to support your local art and crafts people. Typically speaking, they are very, very well trained. They are very, very good at what they do, and almost none of them charge anywhere near what they're worth. Again, I encourage you to support young people to get into the arts and crafts, and particularly the skilled trades. Okay, we do a lot of skilled trades training here at Jefferson College, and there's a lot of other places that do, but the world will not function without skilled trades. And lastly, time's the most precious thing we have. I really appreciate y'all spending some of it here with me today and your support for the speaker series and for Jefferson College. And with that, I want to go into show and tell. So, this is, I got tired of stretching this out, so I stopped at about 28 inches, but this is what I got out of a cubic inch of steel. Now I'll pass this around. I could probably take this out another 18 inches or so. And I did this by hand with a hammer. If I'd run it through a rolling mill or pull it through die plates, we could probably take it out to almost, and annealed it as we went, I could take it out to a piece of thread. I don't know how long it'd be. But, so, who was making a long one? How'd you do? I know it's going to be a challenge to pick it up. That's pretty good. Because you got your own material limitations. It's not going to let you go all the way out to a thread. All right, so, flat piece. I came up with something that's just about 4 inches square, and I don't know, maybe a 16th, fat 16th thick. How did y'all do with a flat piece? Yeah, y'all win. That's cool. Good stuff. All right, so here's the interesting piece. A lot of blacksmiths make leaves. We know a guy named Pat McCarty that makes leaves as a warm-up exercise, and he sells hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of leaves. Yeah, a lot of blacksmiths will make leaves. This one's got the Jefferson College logo stamped in it. There's the Viking, and it's got my touch mark stamped in it. So that one will be up here on the table for you to look at as well. So, my question for you. Everybody, when blacksmiths do demonstrations, one of the things we almost always hear is, my grandfather was a blacksmith. And our question back to that person is, do you still have his tools? Yeah. So, I'll leave that for you. What are your questions for me?
Okay, hold on, let me grab the microphone.
Okay. I don't want to interfere with the process.
You didn't mention anything about aluminum. I know with exhaust systems, for the weight, everybody's going to aluminum. It's hard to weld aluminum. You want to touch on anything about aluminum products?
You can forge aluminum. I have never done it successfully. It depends on the alloy. I know it's doable, but I'm not quite sure how to make that work. But yes, you can do that. You have a question, sir?
Yeah.
Whenever they're fusing and making the different metals, you're mixing them together, the process of doing it, I know you can melt them together or something like that. Do you hammer them together or what all kinds?
Oh, when you're welding or when you're doing the pattern welded steel?
If that's called welding or whatever, do it.
Yeah, it's a weld, and it's actually a surface bond. You're basically swapping molecules when you do it. It's not taking it all the way to a melt. You can. If you're going to do a melt, it'll be in a crucible, and that'd be more of an alloy.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yes?
You haven't even told us your favorite song. I bet I can guess it.
Oh, come on, what do you got?
The Anvil Chorus, of course.
There you go. As a Canada guy, I'm pretty fond of the 1812 Overture, too. So.
Question back here anywhere? Anyone else?
Are there many women welders?
There are lots of women blacksmiths, yes. Women welders as well. But I can think of, when I was going to school in Carbondale, Roberta Elliott was a graduate student while I was there as an undergrad. She went on to be very successful. There were about half of my class, either graduate or undergraduate, were female, and I can think of, yeah, there's a lot. When we go to a conference, it's not unusual for one or more of the demonstrators to be female. There's a lot out there, yeah. Yeah.
And you talk about young children
Mhm.
getting into the art. What about older people getting into that?
I don't see why not. I mean, we have a lot of people that show up at conferences that are curious. And like I said, all these classes are out there and available. And as long as, and when you talk about like accessibility options, okay? I can't remember the gentleman's name, but I know a fabricator, welder, blacksmith. It's a buddy, it's friends of a buddy of mine down in Poplar Bluff that is in a wheelchair. I've watched people in wheelchairs work under power hammers. And there's an Israeli blacksmith named Yuri Hoffy that passed away a couple of years ago. Yuri had a lot of problems with one foot because of diabetes, eventually had partial amputation done, and he did a whole lot of tooling and rigging so that he could sit at his anvil. So, yeah, why not?
And do you sell your things?
I do commission work. I used to do some production and try to put it in shops and things, and that wasn't viable for me. I do commission work. I'm very slow, and I'm out to like July or August of next year. But yes, yeah. And like I said, this is what I want to be when I grow up. So.
Thank you.
Flatten out that piece, I guess you want to be a blacksmith.
Yes, I do.
Now, you mentioned earlier about the making additives to color different things. Down in Branson, I bought a butterfly that was colored on the heat.
Yes, that's the other thing.
I was wondering if you could do a fine too.
Yes, you can, absolutely. You get that surface clean and then start applying heat. There's a whole rainbow of colors that will go through. The pictures that were flashing, the big bowl at the end, that gold color and the purple on the edges, that's all produced with heat.
Okay, and the state marble.
It stays, yeah. Yeah, it's a surface oxidation, so it becomes part of the metal's properties. You can buff it back off and start over, but it's there.
I was going to ask about your logo, but I can tell you, as at the back of your shirt, I could see it more than I'm there until you turned it on. But
Oh, you want to know where the name came from?
yeah, and the logo and all that.
Okay, well, so in my previous life with the military, I traveled a lot. And so traveling, flying around, sitting in airports, I constantly had a book. And for a couple of flights, I read and reread Watership Down. And the Black Rabbit is from Watership Down. It was the Angel of Death at the very end. So it's a literary reference. And I thought, hey, I can fold those ears over and it looks like the horn of an animal.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for sharing time with us today. That was a